So today we'll talk about volunteers and whether or not stations are paying them. And I say that knowing that some stations can't afford to pay them. So that's a privilege on its own. And today Alicia mentioned the idea of compensating volunteers for gas since driving an hour. One of her volunteers drives an hour every day, or whenever they come. And I think that's an interesting point too. So there we go. Anyone want to jump in to start us off?
Your expenses if you're volunteer, that's
No, really?
I think so.
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought
look up.
What?
I like to just start just because that issue came up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So everyone in our station is a volunteer. We have like our underwriting person gets a commission on on underwriting, but or if there's extra jobs that are a little bit difficult, like grant writing or a specific job. Our chief engineer was also a volunteer. I'm like, even though I'm the board president, I'm the kind of like the general manager, if you want to call it, and I've been volunteering there all the time. I mean that's it. In all the 11 years I've been a volunteer at KBB at full time, it's been without no compensation. But so in the programmers are all volunteers. So, and actually the programmers even give some of them, well, not all everyone, but some of them give $20 a month to pay for their gas. I mean, not the gas, the electricity. They're trying to help. They call it their monthly dues. And actually, there was a period of time before COVID that even the directors, the board of directors, all the volunteers, we would put $20. And if you couldn't pay $20 a month, then you could do an extra job. Like if I called you and I asked you, can you help me with a grant or something? Then I would kind of view it that was your monthly donation to KBBS. So we've been doing that for a while now, but we had a situation where we have a programmer who comes from San Francisco, and he asked us if we would be able to compensate him for the gasoline because it was so much. And we calculated that it would be like around $50, $60 a trip per week, 50 or something. I think he even gave me an amount. But I brought it before our board and we talked about it, even though it's something that I guess I, as the manager of the I could have dealt with it, but I wanted to bring it to the board. And they felt that if we started with one person like this, giving them that, then all the other we have other programmers who live far, and they would consider, then it would start like creating we can't afford to pay people right now. I mean, I was going to mention that we got a person to kind of assist me on administrative stuff, and another person assisting our program director. But they're, just like subcontractors. They come in and they're not our employees. We can't afford to hire somebody as an employee. But what I'm saying about this, that sort of brought us the attention about, yes, for me, being a person that I spent 30 years of organizing workers and into unions, and now having to feel like, that I feel bad sometimes not being able to pay people when they ask if they can get compensated. It's just that it's hard based on our budget right now. And now I feel like I couldn't, well, as the board, we decided that we just could not reimburse this person because we came up with alternatives that they could do their program remotely, that we would have somebody down here in Santa Rosa be able to handle what is it called, the controls, and that person could Skype or Zoom in and do his program on the air. And this is a critical programmer, I would say, because he provides the particular language indigenous language that we put out on programming in specific, very specialized, I guess, unique language, and we need him, but we just could not right now feel like we could do that, that we would start a new tradition, and right now we can't afford it, even though it's and when, especially now that we can do things through Zoom and Skype and all of this, that we thought we just he just felt like he didn't want to. He really wanted to be in the studio. For him, being in the studio is really important. So he said he would just stick it out until he couldn't afford it anymore, And so.
Davine, you had a question, comment?
Well, given the gas situation, and I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon, fortunately for us, most of our talk show hosts have already been recording and sending in programming from their home studios now. And it works so well. I mean, I think it's progress versus, and given the reality of the gas situation, I mean, that's a far piece to be driving to do a show. And it depends upon your station because, there are some stations that get a lot of money from CPB and from their sponsors and their underwriters. And then there are stations like ours that get really not any money from anybody. So I think it really depends upon the financial situation of the station. If it's flush, then yeah. But you're right, it is going to start a pattern for other remote people who are far away. So, but I just think that times have changed and radio can be done differently than the way it used to be. And there are a lot of people who are still thinking in analog versus the digital world that we're in, which makes things so much easier and much more efficient.
Do you want to add to that, Ursula?
Yeah, well, Ruth just said she thought that they could get a tax deduction for gas. And so I looked it up on the web and it says, if the volunteer uses their own car while performing services for a charitable organization, they may deduct their actual unreimbursed expenses directly attributable to the services such as gas and oil. Alternatively, they may deduct a flat 14 cents per mile for charitable use of their car. So that's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's on your tax form, but if you don't have a lot of deductions, then it really doesn't make a difference. So
That's what I was going to say. In our case, most of our programmers are not in, they have barely make it through, the kind of work during the day. And then that's why most of our programmers they work during the day, but they work at, either minimum wage or a little bit above, not very skilled work, and so.
if you have the standard deduction, depending on people's living situation, but if you have your standard deduction, you need to be above the standard deduction in order to get more of a deduction. Federal is hard to get there. Although if you live in California and you live in California, the California standard deduction is around 4,000, 4,500. And so if people have medical costs, if they make donations, if they do a lot of charitable work, if they have mortgage or property taxes and all that, it's easier to get over the 4,000, so you get more. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a major deal on your taxes for most people. But anyway, so I can say something about what we do. I
Yeah,
mean, we have been in existence now a little over 3 years, and in the beginning, everybody was volunteer. And then we've realized after a while that, you know, you really needed a program director and an operations assistant. So then what we did was we started with independent contractors, which was fine for a while, but California doesn't allow that anymore. So if you have somebody working in a position that is needed at a station, you have to make them an employee. So we made those positions, we made them employees, half-time employees, so there's no benefits, but you know, it's still cost with taxes and all that. But it's for them, it's better because being an independent contractor, it kills you on your taxes. Even if you don't owe anything on your taxes, if you don't have income officially to be taxable, you pay the employment taxes. And that kills most people who are independent contractors. So that's something to think about. We pay the underwriters, of course. We give them a 30% commission. And if it's returning people or people that have been referred to by other programmers, then they get 20%. We do not pay, and we cannot pay anybody for their traveling. We have somebody living, he drives like 2 hours or something to get to the station once a week or once in 2 weeks to do his program. He hasn't asked because he doesn't need it, but we would not be able to do it. And I think it's a slippery slope to start paying certain volunteers. The only other person that we pay is an engineer who climbs whatever, or we have a chief engineer, she does everything free, you know. Everybody else, me, treasurer, you know, doing office stuff and all that, that's all, we don't get paid, but we have to pay this person because, you know, and we have to pay him $85 an hour. So, you know, if something goes wrong, it's quite expensive. But we would not be able to, and I think there is a big dilemma if you start paying one person, because it also, you know, it changes the dynamics. I already saw how the dynamics changed when we start paying 2 people to do, you know, those important jobs of program director, as well as, you know, taking care of all the programmers and then the operations assistant. Other programmers started to think that, oh, well, then we have to do less because they're being paid. So it changes the dynamics. So you have to think about that too, I think, if you start paying people for their traveling costs. So that's what I think.
did you have another thing to add, Ursula, or is that hand up from before? Okay. Any thoughts on what Matilda said?
I agree that certain things like, you know, we also have an engineer that we do pay because he's a person that has to go up the hill and up the mountain there and all of that. So definitely that, but also our chief engineer was not paid, and the director right now, we don't. A program we don't, you know, but it's not, but we try to get somebody to come in and help. And like you said, it's having contractors, it's really, now it's so hard in California, So it's that whole idea of how do you do it? And it almost has to always be special, something that's very specialized, I guess, and limited task or whatever that you have a crisis about it, whatever, if you want to call it. But it is hard. It's hard because, our goal for us right now, at least for me, is to try to move on KBBF, especially someone that it's hard to recruit someone to replace me if nobody's gonna do it free, and so you have to raise funds to try to get employees, and it's just so hard, because we don't get CPB money or any other, so it's hard.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful picture of.
I know, look at her.
I know.
Look at her. Naveen.
I know.
And Marcus says, if she does it, I'm going to quickly find myself a picture too.
Oh, so he's gonna try to find it.
I bet he's looking for a picture.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I hadn't thought about that, doing that.
What do you guys do in Iowa?
Well, I guess I'm a little bit trying to sort out in my head what the difference is between volunteers and staff, because I see a distinction. I am amazed at those of you stations who run the stations without any paid staff at all. I think that's just an incredible commitment to make and very difficult. So I think of, when at KHOI, the question was kind of what is the minimal staff needed to be able to stay on the air. And, at first there was no employees, and then there was what we did is we hired an operations manager, somebody who was responsible for keeping the studio and the automation system and the machines intact. And I think that started about 3 years after the station went on the air, that we hired an operations manager. And about 3 or 4 years after the station went on the air, it was about 4 years, it was after the operations manager. I was the manager and the chair of the board at the time, and everything else, program director, volunteer manager. So I said I was going to leave the board and I wanted a stipend. So I was making a modest stipend, and we had a full-time operations manager, and that was kind of that was as much as what the station could do to hire staff. And then with time, there was also some money found for an assistant manager, because I had too much responsibility for how much I was being paid, and also, in light of the fact that I had another full-time job, which is this job. So there was an assistant manager at it. And then when I left the station, essentially what they did is they combined what had been my salary. That was always one of the big problems, was how was I going to leave the station, because there was no replacement. There was nobody who would be willing to do, it's what you were saying, Alicia. Nobody's willing to do what I was doing. But the kind of the solution was that when I had an assistant manager when I resigned, and essentially they took his salary and what I had been making and conflated them into one job, and then found some other ways to, with an exchange of benefits that wasn't monetary, but was also helpful to him. So they kind of cobbled together enough benefit so that somebody was willing to be the manager. So now I guess the station technically has 2 full-time people, a manager and an operations manager. And everything else is volunteer. You know, the chief of operations is volunteer, and he's an IT expert, so he kind of makes sure that KHY has an internet tower connection. It doesn't have a microwave tower connection because we can't see the tower from here. So that's provided, you know, on a volunteer basis. Ruth here, she was the business manager. She did that as a volunteer. All the other jobs were done as volunteer, and the program direction and volunteer management was essentially part of the station manager's job. I don't think we ever found anybody who was willing to do that on a volunteer basis. So there's not an abundance of people here who are willing to take on administrative jobs for no pay. I think mostly because there's no real tradition of community radio in Iowa, so people don't feel privileged to be able to do it. You know, like I was accustomed to other communities where people feel it's a privilege and a joy to, it's kind of an extension of their activism and kind of participatory citizenship. But that's not a big value in this town. There's not a big tradition of that. So there wasn't, a lot of people like that. There was always a little bit of a struggle with the producers where they, felt that doing their show was about their volunteer work and they didn't need to do more. And then, of course, you always have some people who just show up and volunteer. You know, there's some people who just do that, who take that on and make it their application. And that's always those people are incredibly precious, right? You have to really value those people when they come along. So it was, it was always a source of struggle. I mean, for me, it was a big struggle between the board and myself because I was overwhelmed with more than 2 full-time jobs. And they didn't really know how to solve that problem. But eventually it got resolved. Eventually it did. But I don't know now, I'm not involved with the station, so I don't know how they're handling a lot of those things, that have to be done. I don't know how many people are volunteering to cover all the various, I come from kind of listening to them, and I kind of get the impression that they're kind of right now just maintaining kind of a bare bones situation and hoping things will develop. That's kind of the sense I get from them right now, but I haven't spoken with them in recent times, so I don't know. So, but there's definitely no money for any of the volunteers. I think my feeling when I was the manager, and again, I'm not the manager anymore, so it's no longer my decision, but my feeling was that the next priority would have been a news director, that a news director would have just really, increased the value of the station to a great degree and increase its ability to raise money a lot. But that was, my opinion. I don't know if they still feel that way or not. So I guess if I were manager, that would be my priority right now, would be to pay I think a news director has to be paid because it's of the accountability that's needed for that. Other than that, I agree that I think, I heard a presentation at a GRC meeting where the guy was saying that, the manager was saying that he realized he had to pay people a commission to do underwriting, and he would offer this to the producers, and some of the producers took him up on it. And I realized that he was probably right about that. We had been trying to do it on a volunteer basis, and it just kind of didn't go anywhere. So that was one of the things that I would have, implemented if I had stayed. It was just taking a while to get organized. But I agree. I think you probably have to offer a commission to people who get underwriters. It's just kind of a reality of motivation. we tried to get our producers to get underwriting for their own show, but there was just not enough motivation for them to do it, you know? They weren't getting anything out of it. And unfortunately, that's just human nature. It just wasn't appealing enough for them to really do the work. Most people are kind of afraid of doing sales anyway. So, and I'm trying to think of other situations where I remember there were a few times like during fund drives, we needed a particular task taken care of, and we would allocate a little bit of money to hire somebody very briefly who was a volunteer to do some tasks. And sometimes that worked out, but interestingly enough, it usually didn't work out. Usually the person was so accustomed to being a volunteer that they weren't reliable, or in a few cases, they just flipped out, and kind of walked off and became belligerent for a while. And that was kind of an interesting psychological thing that I never really was able to sort out. But it made me realize I had to be kind of careful about offering any volunteer money, because it just changed the relationship so much. And that not always for the better, sometimes it just kind of upset a balance that had been there and just now raised a lot of other issues, So
That's
my
interesting.
screen is frozen. Yeah, my screen's frozen, so I can't tell if you're hearing me or not, but I'm hoping you are.
Has anyone else found that when you've given money for volunteers that it actually made things worse?
I wouldn't say worse, but the relationship between people, like I said, when we started paying the program director and the operation assistant, it changed the dynamic, and it also changed the attitude, I would say, of the other programmers. So we have to, rebuild that and showing people that, it really is necessary to pay those two people. And, it's easier for them to see that you have to, pay an engineer his going rate to go up to the tower and do all that other stuff and other technical stuff. But to pay, program director, especially if that person that becomes their supervisor. So, it changes. But without those two, we would not be, without our board chair and me doing, a whole lot of work, me being the treasurer and office manager and she doing, general outreach and all that, the whole station would fall apart. And we said that to each other, what if something happens to us? What's going to happen? And so we haven't found an answer for that yet. Because we do find that the volunteerism above the programming by the programmers is getting less. So we need to, reestablish that.
Davine, you talked a little bit about WPVM. Do you want to give a fuller picture of how you guys run?
Well, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Partly, why are these stations mostly volunteer? I know we've been at this station for 8 years now, and when we first got here, the previous management, they required people to pay to be on the air versus the station paying them. So there was a producer fee, and we stopped that because we just came to realize that it might be stopping some people who had real talent but didn't have $50 or $60 a month to pay to be on the air. So we did stop that. But I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I've come to the conclusion that, and I'm just speaking for our station, it is not about money. It's about something else entirely. I do feel like I think someone else just mentioned that it's a privilege to be able to be in the position of that we are, my husband and I, to provide a platform for the local community to tell their stories or get information out about their plays or their theater work or whatever is going on. It's a very unique situation, and I think each station is going to, we are obviously challenged. I do understand that the people like me who are willing to put in 10 or 20 years of sweat equity managing the station to build a very solid foundation are few and far between. I understand that, and I'm in the position to be able to do that, and I consider that a privilege to be able to do this job. But not everybody's going to feel that way. That's why I say it's unique. Our station is unique, and that I kind of am beginning to think that all stations have their own unique unique culture, and and that's just the way it is. And I'm with Matilda. I was just speaking with. We do have a IT guy on retainer, that anything that needs to be done in coding or any of the technical stuff, he is who we have. And I was just speaking with him about, what if I got hit by a bus? Would you be able to train someone else like you trained me? And he did. He trained me on how to manage or figure out how to code the automation software and all the other technical computerized stuff that needed to be learned how to do. But I was just talking with him this past week. Would he be able to take over again and train somebody else if an emergency happened and I was gone? So it's just a very unique situation all the way around. But I would say one thing about our station is not about money. We kind of consider it something of an art form.
I think in many ways what you were saying too, we have this with the KBBF. Next year we'll have 50 years, and so, but it's gone through the hope of having CPB money and having employees and not having any, and being almost close to whatever you want to call it, like people call it roadkill. And but I agree with you that it's like I view the same thing of when people, they don't believe, like I'm sure you get that, Devine, where they don't believe that you've been doing this. Like in my case, that we've been doing this much volunteer work in a way, but it is because for me, it's kind of like a thing. I'm in many ways privileged by being able to have being able to do this as a volunteer. I don't have the necessity to be employed. I mean that I'm retired, and that I also have a very supportive husband who, if it wasn't for him, exactly. Yes, and it's so wonderful to have that, that those partners who are really, are my husband is also a volunteer engineer. He's the one that goes up, deals with also up the hill, deals with whenever things happen and all of this. But to me, the biggest question, I mean, I think is that maybe it's not a question. The biggest concern is like the whole thing is what will happen if I'm gone and and that's it, and to me, I know that people will come up around, and we're replaceable. People will be able, they will, volunteers will step up to the plate and keep the station going. But to me, it's like I don't want them to start from the beginning, like when I did, 10 years ago. When when you have to go back to reinventing the wheel, to have to the struggles that we went through of freaking out every month if we even had the rent to pay, or the electricity and all those. So to me, this is why I feel that even though they're wonderful volunteers, we do need to pay people just to have that stability, I mean, or and in place. And that's one of the biggest, I think, for me, in that I've been trying to figure it out, to try to, how do I get grants? And grants, some grants will pay, some grants will pay for the equipment, but whenever you ask them to give you money for general operations, they don't want to do that, right? When you try to say, I want to get a staff person, a full-time, they rather, like what we have had in some cases, the grants, they want certain programming to happen, not programming, but they want for us to cover, let's say COVID, among certain groups of people in the community. And so we do, in the grant, we put a project director, we put, the budget, we put the different positions that it would take for us to produce the kind of information that we're going to be doing it during that period of time for the grant. And that's the time when, certain, our program director might end up getting, like you say, like almost like a commission, but it's based only so limited. It's based on that particular grant or whatever. And it gives an opportunity for us to get other people to come in, and we give them a stipend for doing voice talent or whatever, different translations into different languages, those kind of tasks. But it's not sustainable. We really, we've been talking about how we need to have someone, replace myself and a director of programming, because we, I talk about it, we're the ones that sort of holding up the radio. And that's not, it's for me, it's kind of, a scary situation, and that I want KBBF to be around for another 50 years, and I'm certainly not going to be, but I want KBBF to, and I want to make sure that we have, we have staff or someone that will be able to take it over. And also, I guess, I'm like you, Vivian. I mean, you got trained, I got trained, and also you, Ursula, that we got trained in so many different roles, and I really, at my age, I don't need to learn anything new, and I don't need to learn any more skills. I just need to be able to, if nothing else, I need to learn how to relax and enjoy time with my family. You know what I mean? So to me, I like, I really want, and it's not putting down, I love being the age I am, and in my culture, being old is an honor. And so to me, when I say that I want young people, it's because I do. Young, and anybody under 60 is young for me. So right now I want people, to really go and, I'm really trying to find that group of people that, like you also said, that have a commitment and the love for the radio, and the understanding of what public radio is, how important and critical it is in our times right now. Especially right now, I feel like, oh my gosh, the commercial and the corporate media is dictating this narrative that is going, horribly the wrong way, and we got to be that alternative voice. It's so critical right now. And so for me, it's we need to find people to replace us that have the same moral beliefs that I feel that I have, and that right now the people I'm around at the radio have, so it just means having to keep going at it, not give up, that's all. I mean,
Hearing you guys talk, you really get to some big core things. Davine, it just sounds like when you say, or well, all of you, Matilda, Alicia, paying or not paying really is a part of informing the culture of the radio station and what do you want it to mean and what do you want it to stand for, and finding people who share those values that probably would be less interested in being paid to keep that tradition going. And then on the other hand, you also want it to keep it going, and paying people is possibility of making sure that it's when you're gone, that's someone else will take it up, and that uncertainty. So that's interesting. Davine, you have another thing to say.
Well, I've come to the conclusion that we are all special people here. We're not the kind of people like us are not on every street corner. And I do have faith that there's more of those people in my town that will eventually appear. But I think that the quandary is there's not a lot of people out there like us at all. And we need to understand that that the person who comes to replace me, I don't know, I've got another 20 years, and I'm hoping that I'm hoping they'll show up way before my 20 years are up. But I know that that's not an ordinary person that just walks in from off the street.
So what I found was, sometimes people, we put out calls for people to come and help with specific jobs. And I had a couple of people help with the office, but of course, because of COVID, many of them older and very hesitant to come in. But for some reason, this one person showed up who is organizationally pretty good. And so she's helping me. And she doesn't want to be trained as a board op person, which I also do. And but she likes to, be there. And then so slowly, she saw me doing my program, which is more of a human interest program about different organizations, what's happening in Santa Cruz. And so she had an idea. And so I said, go with it. So she got me 2 programs. So the last time, this last Monday, I said, we've done both of them. They're all both very good. And, I think we did a really good job. And I had her be involved in the communication with them and then getting back to me and then setting up the program, setting up questions. And she really liked that. And so I said, if you have more ideas, let me know. I mean, you're now basically becoming a producer of the program. And she was just so astonished that I called her to be a producer. And that's all the pay she needs. And in the meantime, she helps me with, organizing the T-shirts and getting the T-shirts delivered to people and keeping the administration of that. So I think there are a lot of different means of pay that could sustain the volunteer idea of our stations. And so I'm going to see if we can expand our volunteers, even from non-programmers, to come in and do these kind of things. I had this other person who was helping me with the office. He then all of a sudden he said, I know what I want to do. I want to be the volunteer coordinator. I couldn't believe it, but he is a volunteer coordinator. He has a job. And so he's our volunteer coordinator, and he's working out really well. Plus, he's technically so good that when we do our pledge drives, He does our IT stuff on our Plex drives and make it easy. So I think those are kind of payments, I would say, that are more valuable to our organization than getting money, because we never have enough money to pay the people that really should get that kind of recognition or that kind of payment. So these are two examples that I'm very pleased that I've been part of. And so I want to look more for that. I'm not sure if you have those examples also.
It sounds a lot like what Davine and Alicia are saying, that the people will start echoing kind of the culture that you're looking for. I was curious, I know we're at about 4 o'clock. Marcus, do you have time to share what you guys do in Silver City?
Yeah, for sure. We are pretty much entirely volunteer run. I get paid, but it's just part-time, kind of pay is what we can afford, and I just consider the rest of the hours volunteering. And I work another job, so it just keeps me afloat. But yeah, we're lucky to have the folks that we do. You know, we have a volunteer engineer who does our tower climbing and also our IT work down at the studio, and he also even like runs an internet company here in town, and that's what we use. And the other day I just had a former architect come into the studio, so that was pretty cool, and start DJing. So yeah, I mean, it's just really how it operates. I mean, I wish, you know, the goal is to get paid more, and or, you know, have our staff, or have this staff that can not have to work multiple jobs to be able to keep going, and also where it's just not myself. Because, you know, and then the volunteering itself is a privilege to have that free time to do it. I think a lot of folks, you know, that we have trouble getting in is because they just don't have the time, or a whole slew of reasons. And I'm really still very new to this nonprofit volunteering world. I've only been in it for a year and a half now. So it's all to learn from me, and all your discussions today actually provide a lot of great, I don't know, insight as to just things I wouldn't have thought of. So yeah, I mean, finding a way to reward our volunteers is challenging. And then also, I don't know, one other question I did want to ask, as far as like the expectations of your volunteers, if they have to do events whenever we have tables and things like that, or if that's the thing at all for anyone else.
You know, with us, I realized that if it was part of the agreement, but because we do have them sign a volunteer manual, just to tell them the rules, certain rules and all that. I found out that if we put there that you have to give a certain amount of hours besides your programming, that didn't work. But I could call them whenever I had like if we had an event, I would call, and I would get volunteers coming in. But if it was part of like a requirement, it didn't work. Just like it doesn't seem to work because as on the board level, and that an application to be on the board of directors, it says, are you willing to give 10 hours a month or something to KBBF? And even though people, they put yes, it hasn't really also been something that they've come, because most of them work all full time. Almost all of them work full time. So it's hard for them to even on the weekends try to give that time or extra or whatever. So but we do ask, but we don't specify it as part of the requirement, if that makes any sense. When people come in, I'm very easygoing about, based on your schedule, whatever you can give hours, just I'm trying to get a set schedule so that I can be there to kind of be with them, supervising them. But I usually don't. We had a situation where someone we had volunteers who were very already set on their hours and what they were doing, a community calendar, they were doing this. And then we had a situation where we got someone and that tried to ask them, to give more. And instead they walked away, we had a temporarily general manager and that person asked them for more, than what they were willing to do. And they came to me, the volunteers, and said, you know what, especially because that person's getting paid, we're not, and that was already, again, the whole dynamic of somebody. So a person that's getting paid is asking me to give more hours, what's wrong with this picture? And so they started walking out. They, and we lost a lot of volunteers in that time because they said no, and instead with me, my attitude is that if you give me 1 hour, I'm like very grateful, and I always tell them, I'm not very good at saying please, because I will just, you walk in and I tell you, this is what you need to do. But I said, I am extremely grateful for everything you do, and I will make sure you know how grateful I am and how important you are. If, just coming in for 1 hour and filing papers, I tell them it really makes a lot of difference. Having things in order. I said, if ever we got an FCC coming in, they look at things being in order instead of, things file up and all that, and you filing that paper and it's in the right order there, here in the right binder, can make a difference. It may, so just trust that every little thing you do for the board, for the station is important. So yeah, it is to me. And I, like I do, like you said, like everybody's been saying, we treasure the volunteers, especially there, and we try to give them as much support as we can, and also, and what I love, what Matilda says, that sometimes there's, if you tell them, I want you to do this, for you to become a producer of a program, they will freak out and they'll leave. But before you know it, they're like, can you help me do this? Can you help me? And before you know it, they got that skill. And then you say, actually, that's what a producer is, what you just been doing. They go, what? And it makes them feel like you said, it's like, oh my God, I didn't know I was capable of that, So yeah, it is. But yeah, sorry it took so long to answer your question, Mark. As my husband says, land the plane, Alicia, land the plane.
Hey, I gotta go. I have a doctor's appointment, but thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, Matilda.
Bye-bye.
But
Bye.
yeah, it's time.
Can I just add one more thing?
Davine, yeah, you had something to say.
Alicia, when we got the station, we used the previous policies and requirements from the past, and that same thing didn't work for us, where, on the forms you had to sign, and you would donate 4 hours for each month for something, and it just didn't work out, and I really didn't push it either. So it might have been partly my not knowing how to deal with it. But the people who do shows, I'm well aware that being on the radio gives them legitimacy that they don't get any other way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that is a very large perk for them to be have that perk in the community. We have one person who does a music show. He happens to send this show in from New York City. And because he's on the radio, he has gotten an in with the opera people in New York City, because he has a radio show and he interviews people. And so there's a perk there for, that's a legitimate perk. And having that FCC license gives a great deal of credibility in being on the radio, being a radio personality. That's a very big perk for people.
I agree. I think they do. It's a status in the community for many of them that they're on the air, you know, and being known, and so it's something for them, you know. And even like when I said that they pay $20, it wasn't us, the board, or anybody that imposed that on them. It was actually the programmers at a programming meeting that they're the ones that said we need to contribute for the use of us being here for that 1 hour or 2 hours to put our program. We need to pay something, and they came up with $20 a month. But it wasn't us, the board, or anybody in the administration that imposed that on. But it is that idea that they feel it's something important to them to do because they have a love for the community, but it's also self-interest because it helps their self-esteem and status in the community that they're on the air. So I agree with you.
This has been a great conversation, guys. Are there any other thoughts that have come up? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed listening to what you all had to say. And I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's great. I miss you all, and it's so great to see you. So
it's good to see
wonderful.
you too. It's always good to
Take
see
care.
you. Have a
Yes.
great rest of your day. And Ursula, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.